Welcome to Apologetics on Mission's monthly AOM talk. Joining us today is Joey Versace, and I'm going to introduce him a little bit more shortly. But our monthly talks involve bringing in apologetic scholars and speakers from around the world. And so we're just thrilled that you're all joining us this morning, this evening. And before we get started, then let me open us in prayer. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, we come to you from all over your creation today. And we come to you because we love you and we want to not only learn more about you, but we want to be able to share our faith with those who don't yet know you. So today's topic is so important to us. It's part of the Great Commission. Evangelism is one of the reasons that we're here, serving you on this earth. So we ask that you give our speaker, Joey, wisdom, that you give us ears to hear, and you give us hands to do the great work. Now, all we pray in Jesus' name. Well, Joey's talk is entitled Curiosity Driven Evangelism: How to Inspire Non-Believers to Seek Jesus for Themselves. Joey is an ordained pastor, evangelist, and team builder. Also, he's a Reasons to Believe Scholar Community growth specialist. He spent over 22 years in ministry, specializing in evangelism and leadership development. Joey may be best known for his track record in training others to effectively share their faith, address doubts, and inspire action. He's about to begin a doctorate in, surprise, evangelism and leadership development, but he's deeply committed to equipping others to open hearts to the gospel, reflecting his greatest passion and calling, which is evangelism. He's got both a bachelor's and a master's degree in biblical studies and Christian studies with an emphasis on missions and evangelism. And I mentioned that he's about to start a doctor of ministry in evangelism and leadership at Northeastern Seminary. So, Joey, we're just absolutely thrilled that you're here. You're so gracious to give up your time. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you to get started. You can bring up your slides, and the platform is yours.
Let me get this.
Let me add, for those of you who didn't hear earlier, Joey is wearing sunglasses, something that he has to do all the time. He's got very sensitive eyes. So yes, he does look cool, but that's not the reason that he's wearing them.
Oh goodness. A benefit that I have, given that I have to wear these. So, a benefit of my glasses, as unfortunate as it may be, is that it does make me memorable. It helps stand out. Because, making an initially bad impression means that there's a low bar and then I surpass it and people warm up to me fairly quickly. So as Doug so graciously shared, to open hearts to the gospel since 2002, I've been very laser focused on reaching the non-seeking non-believer and drawing that person into a sustainable relationship with Jesus, and then equipping other Christ followers to do the same with their unsaved spheres of influence as well. And so I'm joining from LA in California. Doug, could you help me? Where are some of the places people are joining us from right now?
Well, let me tell you where our students are in our current ITEA class. I'd have to, we've got a lot of different people joining us, so I'm not exactly sure where everybody in this particular setting's from. But to give an example, in our current course, we have 54 students from 4 continents, Africa being one, Uganda, Kenya, South Africa, Zimbabwe, Zambia, Tanzania, and Nigeria. Asia, including UAE, Pakistan, and Nepal. South America, Brazil, and North America, USA. So all of those students have been invited, and they may all be here or joining us, but we've actually had students from other countries as well: Korea, Honduras, Croatia. So this truly is the community of believers coming together.
That's incredible. Oh my goodness. And as I understand it, this is being recorded. So if you're
Yes.
watching this later on YouTube, like please leave in the comments where you're watching from. I'm going to come back later and look at that. Just really excited to see where on the globe some of these eyes are coming from. So now in preparation for today's presentation, I had this image of what I was going to do. And Doug had written me and he'd given me some additional insight that was really, really helpful and it changed my mind. And as a result, my final product ended up being, I'll believe, better than what I had initially had planned to do. And changing my mind on things, it's not always the easiest. This wasn't that difficult. He just presented something so compelling. It was fairly easy to do, but that's not always the case. Sometimes changing minds is going to be quite a bit tricky. We often think that we make decisions based on facts and data, and there's a degree of that, but in general, the human mind is a lot more complex than that. When stakes are high, when our emotions, our relationships, our stability is at risk, pressure from someone external to change could actually result in us resisting that change even more. When my autonomy is respected, when we perceive freedom to consider the situation and make our choices of our own free will, our anxiety actually tends to go quite a bit down, and our openness to consider change goes up by a lot. Now, changing somebody's spiritual beliefs, that could be one of the highest stakes situations that someone could find themselves in. I mean, consider there's a lot of pressure coming often from the person that is encouraging them to make this change. And then there's a lot of resistance to change from those around them who share their spiritual worldview. So this could make a decision like that really, really tough. And thinking about this further, let's consider something that's often overlooked when we think about evangelism. And so, Doug, I'll pick on you. You're here. We just had an election in the US. I'm not going to ask you to speak about it. It's a rather controversial topic, right? What I do want to ask is, Doug, if you were asked this question, hypothetically, what are your thoughts about the election results? Tell me, would your tone, your word choices, or maybe the amount of details you give differ in some ways, depending on who is asking you that question? Say if it's from your wife versus a coworker versus a stranger.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. So Doug or anyone, go ahead and shout out for me. What might be a reason for delivering that information differently depending on who was asking for it? Doug, since I start with you, why don't I ask you?
Yeah, yeah. Well, certainly in the election context, if you know where that person is coming from in
Mhm.
terms of their political perspectives, you would probably change you'd be tactful with those perhaps that have a different political perspective,
Yep.
and you might open up more to somebody else who you think shares yours. But in a
Mhm.
larger context, beyond elections and maybe in the faith realm,
Mhm.
uh, how you share your faith um, will depend on the person you're speaking to, the culture they come from, perhaps their race, perhaps
Yep.
their education, economic background, their personal situation. Yeah, all of those things come into play, and you want to be able to adjust your comments that will be most impactful and perhaps more sensitive to the particular circumstances of the individual.
Absolutely. 100% every syllable you uttered. Yes. Controversial topics tend to make our guard go up and our openness to consider change in response to go down. And discussing spirituality can be controversial as well. Now, there's really good news with this is when approached tactfully and strategically, we'll find that a lot of our unsaved friends are actually far more open to considering spiritual change than most of us might have imagined. It's how we discuss spirituality with our unsaved friends that could make a world of difference as to how readily they find themselves willing to consider opening up to the gospel. So today, we're going to focus on opening hearts to the gospel by learning how to make strategic choices about meeting our unsaved friends' spiritual needs, and then also learning how to ask our unsaved friends questions that inspire spiritual self-reflection. So a lot of strategic and influential evangelism. And so picture when Jesus sent his disciples out to evangelize, it's like the big first time this is going to happen. Going to share the gospel with non-believers. He gave them these instructions. So this is in Matthew 10:16. I am sending you out like sheep among wolves. Therefore, be as shrewd as snakes and as innocent as doves. When we're shrewd, right, we're being strategic. We're influential when our motives are innocent. Innocence leads to influence. So think for a moment, what might be important about being evangelistically shrewd as well as innocent? And I know a few people. I'm going to call on Steve Berchi. Hey, Steve, what do you think? What might be something important about being evangelistically shrewd as well as innocent?
So I'd have to say, let's see, you're making me think on my feet or on my exterior as I'm sitting here. But I mean, being shrewd would be trying to understand the context in which in which you're speaking. Is there
Yep,
hostility to certain things? Is
yep,
there commonness? So I think of Paul when he was in Greece, when he was in Athens, and he tried to find what was in common and build on that. So I see that as being shrewd to say, you have a statue here to an unknown God, and
yes,
so he kind of found something in common and built on that.
awesome. And so what's also important about being innocent?
Um, I'm I'd like to. Well, God wants us to be not sinful. He wants us to be
Yep,
pure and clean. But
yes,
the innocent, I think, might. I'm a little curious. I want to say, you want to not go where immediately to where sin lies, but
yep,
I don't know what
yes.
you mean.
You answered like you did because it was fantastic. God wants us to be pure. He wants us to go away from where sin lies. Absolutely. And the shrewd, everything that you said was just fantastic. Being innocent, being pure, being intentional and strategic. And what we end up finding out, everyone, is that when we are shrewd and innocent, as we approach people, innocence of spirit, shrewdness of mind, God's way works. God's way works, and hearts end up being open to the gospel. So, to prepare ourselves to draw our unsafe friends to Christ by being strategic and influential in our evangelism, let's explore a couple, I'll call them rules, that'll keep us on the right track. Okay? So, rule number one is gracious conversation. So, now Paul, probably the best evangelist ever, right, tells the Colossians in Colossians 4, verse 6, he says, let our conversation be gracious and attractive so that you will have the right response for everyone. So explore a little bit what gracious conversation looks like, right? Gracious conversation tends to avoid winner-loser debates. So Dr. Robert Cialdini, he's a legend in the study of influential conversations. And he says that a person's sense of pride can really prevent them from opening up to your point of view if they feel that their pride is somewhat threatened. And so as a solution, he encourages talking in a way that avoids winner-loser debates. That means, for the context of what we're studying today, your unsafe friend never has to lose. They simply will come around to the way of thinking that you're guiding them to. And
Hey,
remember,
Joey, we got a question in the chat, and that is regarding your slides. Do you have additional slides? Because we're still looking at the cover slide.
oh, really? You're just looking at the cover one?
Yes.
Oh, good. Thanks for telling me that. Yeah, it should have been changing all along. So let me see here. Okay, thank you very much for telling me that. So, okay. All right. So what I was saying about Dr. Robert Cialdini, or no, I'm sorry, I already talked about him, that it's not the topic, it's the reaction. People in general are fine talking about controversial topics like faith and politics. Surprisingly, they are. It's not the topic, it's the reaction. Are you going to try to debate me? Are you going to offend me? Am I going to offend you? Are you going to pressure me to change my position or my worldview? People actually enjoy being heard and tend to enjoy explaining something they're passionate about. So again, let's remember, it's not the topic they're uncomfortable with. It's our potential reaction that more likely is what's going to leave them on edge. So the first of Paul's rules that we want to remember is that we are to be gracious in our conversation. So number two is the second rule is swapping roles. Okay. So let's consider that. So James, right, close relative of Jesus, likely his brother, tells us in James 1:19 that you must all be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to get angry. Now, someone who's a listener is a learner. So you become the learner. This is part of the swapping roles strategy. If we swap roles by becoming the learner, your unsaved friend naturally becomes the evangelist of their beliefs to you. And then spiritual conversation largely becomes their idea. They become the evangelist. This is a core strategy that we're going to explore in depth today. When they become the evangelist, you never have to try to prove that their beliefs are wrong. You are free to simply prove that your beliefs are true. Subtle difference, but something that makes a world of difference. You get to say all the same things, but since they're the ones looking to convince you, their defensiveness essentially vanishes. So this is a core tactic of curiosity-driven evangelism. We're going to examine this in a lot of detail in just a moment. Before we do, let's prepare ourselves with some quick tips that keep spiritual conversation positive, strategic, and influential. And so, Doug, could you post a link in the chat for a handout with this information? And so all of you, if you do like to, you can open up that link in another tab, and it'll have all this information on it in case you want to use it to follow along with today's content. It's also going to be in the video description if you're watching this later on YouTube.
Yeah, and Joey, just so you know, many people are joining on their mobile devices,
Yep.
so they might not click on that simply
It's not
because
necessary.
they run out of screen space.
Yep. And
Ben, you're going to post that information?
Yes.
Great.
Yep. And so, and later, for any of you, even on your mobile device, you could always go back when it's posted, and then you could pull it up in the YouTube description at that point. So it'll be available for you on go. And so, okay, some quick tips for strategy and influence in your evangelism. So tip number one, shorter is better than longer. Short and gracious dialogue tends to keep their impression of you positive, their stress low, right? Because these aren't going to be long, drawn-out conversations, and their willingness to repeatedly have spiritual conversations with you very high. Two is focusing on what's most important to them is better than focusing on what's most important to us. When we can keep our spiritual observations centered around their priorities, we can then assure that our evangelism stays ever relevant to their life circumstances, keeping them consistently interested in what it is that we have to share. And then three, focusing on movement is better than fixating on the finish line. See, people's journey to salvation involves a lot of experiences, and it almost always follows a 5-step pattern in order, which begins with trusting a Christian, becoming curious, opening up to change, seeking answers for themselves, and then accepting Jesus. Now, every time you engage them in spiritual conversation, in positive spiritual conversation, you're nudging them towards that finish line. Without those nudges, they'll never get there. Your win isn't limited just to them crossing the finish line. That's a really heavy weight to carry. Your win is every time you engage them in positive spiritual conversation, which is what will eventually help draw them across that ultimate finish line. So now, to keep our evangelism positive, strategic, and influential, let's take a moment and we're going to examine something that Jesus said while he himself was out there evangelizing and sharing the gospel with the crowds. Okay, and we're going to break up into three groups for this in a second. So one is going to go with Ben, one's going to go with Doug, and one's going to stay here in the main room with me. And in our breakout rooms, we're going to discuss an important statement from Jesus. And so let me set the scene. So Jesus, he's traveling along from place to place. He's sharing the gospel. He's evangelizing. He's healing the sick. And this is gathering quite a crowd. And then he notes how spiritually lost these people are that have come together to see and hear more about him. So he turns to his disciples and he says the following. Matthew 9:37, he said to his disciples, "The harvest is great, but the workers are few." So in your breakout rooms, there's going to be two questions in here I want you to discuss. One, what might Jesus have meant by that? But the workers are few. And two, what kind of people might be considered a spiritual harvest? So you have 6 minutes to discuss. And then Ben, if you could go ahead and send us there now.
Okay, well, bear with us a bit. So this breakout technology is a bit new to us. So we think we know what we're doing.
It's okay. So would you like me to facilitate that? We're all going to be in my breakout room here in the mid section.
Yeah, I think why don't we just go for one big breakout room and it'll be big. Just go for it here.
All good. That is all good.
Sorry.
So let me look out in the room. I see several familiar faces. Go ahead and shout out for me. Let me hear some brave souls. Hey, Gary Lee, I see you there. So let's go ahead and let's have someone shout out. What did Jesus mean by the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few? Somebody's answering.
Excuse me, Ben.
Yeah.
Oh,
Hi, Linda.
yes. Hi, Linda. Tell me, what do you think? What might be something Jesus meant by that? What might Jesus have meant by the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few? What do you think? No wrong answers. Let's just brainstorm.
Okay, according to me, I think try to mean that the people that he would want to have in heaven with him,
Yep.
worshiping the Lord. I think that is what he meant with the word harvest.
Oh,
So
yeah.
when he says that the harvest is many, but the laborers are few, it means that the people in this world, the souls in this world are very many, but
Yes.
those that are supposed to reach out to them and tell them about the good news, tell them about the Lord, that we have been created so that we may acknowledge that God is our creator and Jesus Christ is his only son, the one that died for us and resurrected, and our hope is in him. So we have to serve the Lord in order to go to heaven.
Yep.
The people that are supposed to at job are few. So that means that there are few people that take out the good news to the world, but there are very many people in this world that need to hear that word. That is what I think.
Absolutely. Linda, thank you. That is perfect. And Brendan, I believe you raised your hand.
Yeah, good morning. Yeah, I think there's a lot of people that need to be saved and not a lot of people that are going out to do it. So he's encouraging them that they need to get out and do it.
Yep.
And yeah, starting with Jerusalem, Samaria, and the ends of the world, kind of this circle that you go from the closeness and spread out.
Awesome. Perfect. Perfect. Uzziah, if I said that right.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
thank you so much.
Yes.
Yeah. Just make a simple addition.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, when Christ was saying that truly the harvest is great, but the laborers are few. Me also, my suggestion, I'm saying he was talking to us who are in the world to labor, to work with him, because for him he really prepared for us the field by dying for the whole world and giving himself for the whole world to redeem us. Now we are supposed to labor with him and speak to all the people as he told us in the Great Commission. Go all over the world and preach the good news. Thank you, sir.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Fantastic. Thank you, Zaya. Abigail, you were going to share something?
Yeah, so yeah, hello everyone. I also think that what the verse is trying to mean is that the laborers the harvest is much, but the laborers are few. Is we the people, like the people in the world, it's the harvest. Like, because when you said that, something came into my mind that says that how would they know if no one tells them? And how can someone go if no one sends me? So that verse kindly like sends me to, like, it has already sent me that, like, go tell them, talk to them, like, you are the laborer, like, go to them, tell them, like, because they're not going to know without you telling them. So you have to go and tell them so that they can know what's supposed to be known to them. That, so I think that people who don't know that what it's the harvest. Yeah.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you,
Thank
Abigail.
you.
Hey, what were you
Yep.
going to?
Yeah.
There you go.
One way of saying it is very, very few Jews had a personal relationship with the Father. And virtually no Gentiles, maybe a few Buddhists and who knows what, had a personal relationship with God. They weren't even seeking that kind of relationship with God. So Jesus was bringing an absolutely revolutionary message. And so the harvest is, gigantic. That's what almost everybody.
Yep. Oh, goodness. I'm loving all these raised hands, and the 6 minutes are actually up. And so now I got to go back to my content here. Forgive me for that.
For those of you with your hands raised, go ahead and put your thoughts in the chat if you want.
Please do. There we go. Okay, perfect, perfect. What good insight you all have. My goodness. I can see that you have been well trained by Apologetics on Mission. According to Jesus, there's a harvest that's ready to be gathered. Okay, it's this idea that there are a lot of people out there that would be receptive to the gospel. Now, our image of most non-believers is often influenced, actually, by the least receptive examples, while overlooking repeated directives in Scripture that leave unreceptive individuals actually alone. Now, Matthew 10:14, we're told that if any household or town refuses to welcome you or listen to your message, shake its dust from your feet as you leave. Or Matthew 7:6, don't waste what is holy on people who are unholy. Don't throw your pearls to pigs. They'll trample the pearls, then turn and attack you. So this idea that we often have of the highly aggressive non-believer who's going to attack us comes from really judging the least receptive, or the whole by the least receptive. If we refuse to move on when someone clearly and directly communicates that they do not want to engage further about the gospel, we're actually being disobedient to Jesus. We're further souring them to the gospel. We're damaging our prolonged influence, and we're making things much harder for the next evangelist who will meet them as we continue to grind away at their tolerance for spiritual conversation. Perhaps most damaging is that this experience paints a picture of the average non-believer that simply isn't true. As Christians, we picture these fights and these arguments with non-believers, and we end up really discouraged and hesitant to talk about Christ with non-believers at all. The average non-believer is not sitting back waiting to attack us. The average non-believer, when approached respectfully, is calm, open-minded, and at least willing to hear us out, even if they don't in the moment show signs of accepting Jesus for themselves. When we know how to strategically engage in spiritual conversation, it's actually much more likely that our unsaved friends will remain perfectly friendly versus the likelihood that they'll turn and devour us, which typically only happens when we press beyond the limits Jesus told us that we're supposed to respect. Now, assuming better of our unsaved social circles is usually a much safer bet. So I think, who is your ready harvest. Okay? These are the people who are polite and, if approached correctly, would be perfectly fine with engaging in spiritual conversation. So take a moment and think of take a moment and think of specific non-believers that you know. I'm going to give you 5 seconds and come up with names and faces in your mind of specific non-believers that you know. Okay, now, if you had to put them individually in one of 2 categories, which ones are the devourers, right? Those that have explicitly rejected the gospel and will attack if you bring it up again. And then which ones better fit in the harvest category? Go ahead and insert them in your mind right now. I'm going to give you 5 seconds. And here's a tip. If you're not sure, they're probably part of the harvest. It'll generally be safe to approach them at least once, and then you can reevaluate where they best fit from there. So, okay, now that we have Jesus' words and we're trusting them, right? That by avoiding the devourers and identifying who is part of the harvest, meaning our friends who are more likely to be receptive to conversation, okay, we're ready to examine what this strategy looks like in action. Okay, it's how we actually swap roles. That core strategy of today's presentation, where the non-believer becomes the evangelist and you actually become the learner. And we could do this in 2 really simple steps. So let's take a look at step 1 right now. Okay, so step 1 is initiating the conversation. So Doug, I want you to do me a favor. Doug, go ahead and read step number 1 for me out loud.
Yes. Name a personal challenge your unsaved friend can empathize with.
Okay, I'm going to give an example. Hey, pal, I've really been struggling with stress at work recently. So now, Doug, go ahead and read number 2.
Ask how, given their spiritual worldview, they deal with it.
You know, I know you had that difficult season at work. Oh, it was really tough for you. As a Buddhist, when you're under a lot of pressure, how do you deal with that? Now, my Buddhist friend is likely to tell me something along the lines of, by eliminating desire from your life. Okay, Doug, go ahead and read number 3 for me.
Validate and defer to a later date.
Hey, wow, that was great. I could definitely see some benefits that could come out of that. I want to let that sink in for a bit. Now, can I ask you about this a bit more a bit later? Now, everyone, go ahead and think for a moment about a specific unsaved friend in your life. Now, think of a challenge that you have that an unsaved person in your life might be able to empathize with. I'm going to give you 5 seconds to do that. Here are some tips to identify a personal challenge. If you have a hard time coming up with one, it doesn't have to be deep because it's just a conversation starter. And 2, if I asked you right now, hey, how could I pray for you? There's a good chance that that right there is the challenge. So whatever you would have answered to how I could pray for you, you could go ahead and you could use that. Right? So let's see. Doug, let me pick on you again. What is a challenge that you have that an unsaved person in your life might be able to empathize with?
Well, I'd have to go back to what drew me to apologetics. They were the intellectual challenges I had with my own faith. The heartfelt understanding of who the Lord is was always there, but could I articulate it? Did I truly understand rationally and evidentially why it was true?
Awesome. Fantastic. And now, in relation to their spiritual worldview, you would simply ask their advice. And boom, you're done with step 1. Now you have as many days as you need to plan for step 2, which is when you'll revisit this conversation. And so now, say it's been 2 or 3 weeks. I'm going to come back. Step 2, revisiting the conversation. So Doug, go ahead and read for me number 1.
Later, return to the subject.
Hey, pal, I've been thinking about what you shared with me, and you know, it's been a big help. Go ahead, Doug.
Validate something Christian compatible.
Now, I especially love the idea of being content with what you have. You know, Jesus says very much the same. Doug?
Identify something incompatible with Christianity.
You know, I've had a hard time applying this other side. There are things that I'm supposed to desire, right? Like to be loving to my wife, a healthy future for my children, the well-being for the poor, etc. Where might I be misunderstanding what God really wants from my life? Now, what makes this effective? We are now having a spiritual conversation. My friend is in the role of evangelist. This tactic allows me to explain all of my beliefs and to even challenge his, but only as they apply to me. A lot of I language here. So he's not defensive. His self-reflection allows him to critically examine his beliefs without me directly pressuring him to do so. I also get to learn what he actually believes, which will be different in some ways, sometimes significantly, from the official position of his religion. Right? And to find answers for me, he ends up exploring my faith and even examining Jesus all on his own. Incredibly powerful, incredibly transformational, and non-combative. And so, we've explored positive ways to engage in spiritual conversation and to inspire your unsafe friends to begin exploring faith of their own initiative. Now, while these tactics dramatically reduce the likelihood of a hostile or an aggressive encounter, it could still happen, right? Especially now at the beginning, while you're just learning how to use these strategies. So I want to share 5 of the most common scenarios that you may find challenging, and then how to navigate them with positivity in a way that's going to strengthen your spiritual influence instead of straining it. So, okay, scenario number 1. This is an objection avalanche. This is when the questions, the challenges, and the objections, they all come so rapidly and back to back in a way that's overwhelming and often leaves us uncertain of where to even begin. You know, it's like, well, what about this? What about this? What about this? Boom, 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 boom. Whoa, I don't even know what I just heard. A great way to navigate this calmly and confidently while continuing to inspire your unsaved friend to self-reflect on what's most important to them is to respond with, hey, those are great questions. You know, if you could pick one to ask God first, which one would it be? Focusing on objections that aren't in the top 3 seldom, if ever, move this person's conviction closer to God. They're just immediately replaced by another objection. It's because they are not the actual issue holding this individual back. Our goal then is to discover what their top 3 questions or objections are and focus our energy there. And the great news is that getting past the top 3 actually tends to create a domino effect that takes care of the rest. We could even use this tactic proactively, if you want, before the avalanche has a chance to start. So a simple way to figure out that what that actually is just by sharing one of your own. So picture, okay, you're talking with your unsafe friend about spiritual things, and you say, you know, if I could ask God one question, it would be, how could I be cured of this illness? And now, but how about you? If you could ask God one question, what would it be? Oh, you got your info right there. So now, scenario number 2. This is an aggressive challenge. So occasionally, our unsafe friend may make a negative statement about faith that we feel is important to address. Now, inspiring your unsafe friend to critically self-reflect of their own free will is incredibly effective towards de-escalating the tension and nurturing your spiritual influence. Now, there are 3 questions that I use that are based on, modified somewhat, but based on research from Greg Kokel, who's the president of Stand to Reason. And they help the unsaved person examine their beliefs while helping us navigate objections that otherwise might cause us some stress. And they are, what do you mean by that? How did you learn that it's true? And what difference would it make? So imagine my unsafe friend says, you can't trust the Bible. It's been changed thousands of times. Well, what do you mean by that? Now, my friend needs to really think about phrasing and explaining their specific argument, which usually triggers a little doubt in them. Oh, throughout the ages, the church has taken the Bible and rewritten it to control the people. Now, see how this argument just reduced itself to something very specific. The church has rewritten the Bible to control people. Gosh, wow. How did you learn that that's true? Okay, self-reflection again, and likely a little more doubt. Are they sure this is true? If so, what's their best argument for this belief? I watched a documentary on Netflix that explained a lot. Often the evidence could be rather underwhelming. Sometimes it's a lot stronger. Good news is it doesn't matter. Regardless, we can follow up with this. Now, I'm sure that documentary was really well put together and thought-provoking. What if it turned out not to be true? And we found out that the Bible actually could be trusted. If we could know that it hasn't been changed, what difference would it make? Now, their answer is going to tell you a lot. If they say nothing, well, we know that this isn't in their top 3, so I don't want to spend too much time on it. If it does make a big difference, well, this is something we want to spend some more time with. It'll also inspire them to reflect on a scenario where they find out that this is all true and actively consider what impact that would have on them. The next one is a personal tragedy. Okay? Understanding and making sense of God's place in suffering requires quite a lot of spiritual maturity, which a non-believer naturally wouldn't have. They may be very mature. Spiritual maturity just comes spending time and experiences with God and God's Spirit. So naturally they wouldn't have that. Now, if you have godly wisdom to give, by all means give it. Attempting to force an answer after a non-believer experiences tragedy could actually do more harm spiritually than good. And I think I got to say all these wise biblical things, so I'm going to force it. I'm going to speak very unnaturally and try to force spirituality. That often is received with a lot of resistance and negativity. So consider what the greatest evangelist to ever live, the Apostle Paul, tells us in Romans 12, verse 15. He says, rejoice with those who rejoice, mourn with those who mourn. According to Paul, the biblical directive is empathy. Empathy will earn you spiritual influence. Trying to force an answer often results in that influence being damaged. Scenario number 4 is people in hell. Yikes. So my unsaved friend may say to me, I cannot accept a God that would send people to hell. Okay. I'd reply, yeah, it's a disturbing concept. I understand. Many Bible scholars describe heaven as being in Jesus' direct presence and hell as being in some way or another somewhat removed from it. Now, we don't know people's circumstances or what their relationship with God really is, just that God says that everyone will be given their fair chance to choose if they want to be with Jesus for all eternity or not. And so how about you? Would you want to be with Jesus? I mean, if you had to decide today, what would your choice be? Now, it's an unsettling question, but helpful towards moving their focus back to themselves. It allows them to process that heaven or hell is a choice. It's a choice that they themselves are actively making as they reflect on what choice they themselves would give right now if they had to make that call. And then lastly, scenario 5, science versus faith. The non-believer may say, science has disproved that. So we want to start by asking, what specifically? Now, upon their self-reflection, unless they themselves are a scientist of some sort, you'd likely be surprised by how little outside of, when someone's outside of STEM fields, how little they usually have to offer. Things like science has disproved faith. There are these huge statements that often get thrown out there without many examples. The compatibility of science and the Bible is reasons to believe's specialty. Like RTB literally exists to open hearts to the gospel by revealing God in science. The incompatibilities between science and the Bible tend to be greatly exaggerated. Plus, the loudest voices tend to come from those who know the least on the subject. RTB and others have produced countless books, articles, and videos about the compatibility between the two. We have virtually every resource you could possibly want to tackle science faith issues. So have confidence that, in general, the tension is exaggerated. Now, to support just the incredible ways you're being equipped through Apologetics on Mission, if you're a doctoral graduate or if you're currently a doctoral student, consider also being affiliated with Reasons to Believe as a scholar evangelist. We'll invest in your evangelistic efforts and contribute in just any way that we can to supporting the amazing skills that Apologetics on Mission is nurturing in. So to do that, you just write me at jversace@reasons.org. And I believe Ben is going to post that in the chat right now, my email address. And then if you're watching on YouTube, you could find my email address in the description. So just write me, and I would be honored to send you more information about also being a scholar evangelist with Reasons to Believe. Okay, so now to make sure that today's points stick in your memories, we're going to close by doing a quick review quiz of the things we covered. Okay, I'm going to ask a true-false question, and I am going to give you about 5 seconds to think before I give the answer. And Doug, I'm gonna pick on you again. I am gonna put you on the hot seat to see if you know. And if you don't worry. All that means is that I didn't do enough on the front end to make it clear. So right,
Do I still have 5 seconds to think about it?
Yep. So I'm gonna so hence we do this at the end to make sure that if I did leave things unclear, I can keep them very clear now before we wrap up. So question number 1. Focusing on your unsafe friend's top 3 questions is more effective than trying to deal with an avalanche of objections at random.
That is true.
You are right. Yes, Doug. Focusing on their top 3 often results in them feeling equipped to overcome the rest on their own. Focusing on them at random often results in this black hole of never-ending objections that may get answered but have no ultimate beneficial effect. So the next one. It is better to focus on proving your unsafe friend's beliefs are false than to prove that your beliefs are actually true.
I think that's false.
You are right. You are killing it, Doug. Yes, it is false. We want to swap roles and become the learners. It's generally more effective for them to reflect on their own beliefs as they try to teach us why ours might be wrong. It also keeps us in our area of expertise, which is Christianity, and away from critiquing subjects we might not know very well, like their belief system. Remember, truth has nothing to fear from exposure. So when it comes to the gospel, truth is on our side. Okay, when Jesus said the harvest is plentiful, he was talking about hostile, aggressive, and combative non-believers.
I don't think so. That's false.
Yes, you got it, Doug. Right again. False. We are repeatedly told to leave alone those who aggressively reject the gospel. Now, it doesn't mean shunning them. We can stay in relationship with them. It just means respecting their boundary when they tell us directly they do not want to talk to us about this anymore. The harvest are the people who are polite and, if approached correctly, would be very willing to engage in spiritual conversation. That is the majority of people out there. And if you're not sure about the person, it's usually safe to initiate spiritual conversation at least once, and then you'll know enough to decide from there. And lastly, these 3 questions that are helpful for navigating challenges and inspiring self-reflection are: what do you mean by that? How did you learn that it's true? What difference would it make?
Like Greg Kokel? Yes, that's true.
Yes, it is true. Spiritual self-reflection is key to someone opening themselves up to change. Right? These questions will help guide your unsafe friend through that process, and they'll do it of their own initiative. So here at the end, to consider real life ways that we could use these tactics to open hearts to the gospel and to reach your unsafe friends for Christ, we are going to take, well, we would do breakout rooms, but instead we'll just do the big breakout room, take about 5 minutes, and here's what we're going to discuss. What is one thing you learned from today's presentation that you could apply with your unsaved friend? After that, we'll go into a period of Q&A. And so right now, we're all back together. And so let's open up. What is at least one thing that you learned today, any one tactic, any one tip that you could use with your unsaved friend? So go ahead and let's just start by shouting it out. Let's have somebody shout.
To be gracious in our conversation and
Oh,
not trying to be debating our position versus theirs.
yeah, Gil, that's perfect. Yes, yes, being gracious. Fantastic, fantastic. Uzziah.
Yes, sir. I've learned to listen, to be a good listener, as it
Oh,
said in James.
yes,
I
yes.
have to listen to.
Fantastic. Excellent, excellent, excellent. Really, really, really good. Let me hear a couple more here. Brendan. Let me glean from some of your wisdom. Brendan Biggs, go ahead and unmute. What's one thing that we discussed today that you could use with your unsaved friends?
I just really appreciate the example that you gave the spiritual conversations, how to start it, and then ask them some questions about their worldview, and just to have that patience to say, I'll get back with you on that, and give it some time.
Yes, yes. What's really ideal between phase or step 1 and step 2, we take as much time as we need. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, cool, I'll get back to you. And then I could write Brendan, if I'm nervous about it. Okay, Brendan, here's what he said. What do you suggest? How do I, what might be some good ideas to reapproach this later? We have total control of the timetable. Good, really, really good. Let's see. Let me ask you a couple more people here. Gary Lee. How about you, handsome? What might be one tip or trick that you could use?
Well, I like the idea of having the person you're trying to reach explain their worldview to you. And I think that builds, rapport, trust. And I think that's a great way, however the conversation starts, to really get them into it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I see 2 hands raised. We'll take these 2. And then Doug and Ben, I'll turn it back to you as we go into our Q&A portion. So let's see. Jay, can I just say Jay Tava?
It's Judy.
Judy. Yes, Judy, and then Linda. Judy, unmute for me.
Hello, how are you?
Hello.
Yes, the part that interested me most is about when we change roles, because mostly when we evangelize to people, most people, they complain that Christians, it's like they want to impose their beliefs on them. They don't want to listen from the other side.
Yes.
So I think it is important that we change roles. Then I become a listener. Then we hear their side of the story, and we also hear how far they are lost. Then we get through them bit by bit until they get. Because sometimes it's like we are in a hurry for them to just say yes, I want to be a Christian, but they don't understand. That is why sometimes maybe you find somebody is like over and over again. If another person comes, they say, "Are you saved?" They don't know. They say, I'm not saved." It's like, but if we ground them, even if another person comes, even if that person is a Christian, they will say, "Yes, I know. Somebody helped me. Now I know I believe in Jesus. I know I'm a Christian."
Yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that part.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see, we'll go Linda, Joel, and then I'll turn it to Ben. Or Doug. So Linda?
Yes, so thank you so much for today's presentation. It was so amazing. What I've learned, I've actually just confirmed that we have been thinking of evangelism the other way around. Because we speak to the non-believers about what we know, but then we don't sometimes we don't take the initiative to find out what they. Sometimes when we tell them what we want them to know, they will ask us, so what about that? And so what? What next? And then I've just realized that how about I change those questions and ask that non-believer what they think. So I'll find out what they believe, and then I'll ask them, so why do you say that is the truth? And then maybe what I'm saying maybe is not the truth. And then they'll give me their thoughts and what they, what they think about what they say. And then I'll ask them, so with that, what next? Do you think it is good? Do you really wish to listen from my part also? So I really appreciate that. That's my take home to. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. And so Ben and Doug, I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah, I think Joel, you had a question.
I saw that hand. I thought the hand went down.
Thank you very much. I just want to thank you so much because it is very relaxing to know that you don't actually have to know all the religions to actually evangelize to people. Because when you spoke, I was a bit more relaxed because you said that sometimes there's information that they're going to tell you about their religion that you actually don't know, or their beliefs that actually don't that you actually don't know about. So I had this mindset of maybe I have to first learn about every form of worldview, every form of belief system before I actually come to evangelize to people, so that I can actually find a way to approach them. But the fact it's very possible for me to just listen to them and corner them in a certain direction that actually maybe it's not as true as you think. And just to add on that, so that means I don't actually have to answer every question. One of the problems that really happens is having to answer every question. That it really is breaking, because sometimes you answer that question and then another question pops up and then another question pops up. And that can actually be very disappointing, because the person, you're actually not answering the important questions. And that means you'll be in a circle and repeating yourself. And before you know it, the person is just saying, I'm not actually believing, because you're really not answering the important questions. Thank you so much for that. I really learned a lot in reaching out to people.
Thank you.
All right, Joey, an amazing presentation. Very different, by the way, than what we're used to. Usually we get lectured to for 60 minutes, and then we open it up for questions. And I think what you are proposing to us and how we share our faith is reflected in how you teach, because you're very open, and people are willing to talk, more willing to talk, I think, than I told you I thought we would actually get in our conversations. If I could summarize what you said, perhaps one way to summarize it is to say that what you're basically, you've shown us various ways that we can engage someone in order to understand where they are at in their journey. Because if we don't know where they're at, what they truly believe, or what their objections to our own faith are, we're not going to get anywhere with them. And we're guilty as Christians of just assuming something about what they believe and then going from there. And so a relationship building, taking the time to understand who they are, applying many of the techniques that you have proposed to us, just are invaluable ways in order to do that. So I don't know, Joey, is that perhaps a fair way to summarize what you're saying?
Yeah, that sounds really good. I thought quite a while back, what are all the things about evangelism that make me somewhat anxious? And I'm like, you know what? How could I swap this around to where the person I'm with channels all that, the stress, and I'm the one who's feeling easy? Because often when I'm approaching somebody with the gospel and I'm initiating this and I'm the evangelist, I'm thinking through, how are they going to receive this? Am I going to offend them? Do I know their worldview properly? Am I communicating this clearly? You know what? How about they be the evangelist? and I will sit back and just learn about them. And again, when they're the evangelist, sort of one of the things I mentioned before is I don't have to prove that their beliefs are false, just that mine are true. Because this is how this relates to me. I have had a problem applying this because I am not certain of how to engage with that because there's a lot of I language. And so it's just really alleviated a lot of that pressure. And shockingly, I'll learn all about like my in-laws. Dang it, because they might watch this later, but I just mentioned it. So it's okay. I'm just not going to share it with them now. But many of them are Mormon, right? And so I'm like trying to learn all this about Mormonism, and that's good to do, you know, being informed. What I've learned is it's better to learn the kind of Mormon that they are, right? Because that may differ some way significantly from what's the official platform. And I'm like, oh, well, check that out. So
Well,
yeah.
that's even true if you speak to someone who claims to be a Christian. You need to figure out what does that really mean to them. Yeah. Hey, so the Q&A has started, and the way we do this, for those of you that haven't been with us, is you either raise your hand electronically, like Bill Scott has done here, wave your hand. Hopefully, we'll see it physically, or type your question in the chat. So I see Bill Scott's hand is raised. So Bill, go ahead and unmute. What's your question or comment?
Yeah, I wanted to say it's a very good talk. I really appreciate it. And for our Ratio Christi candidates on there, and for down here and anybody else who's interested in doing public evangelism, one of the methods that we use that's very effective is setting up a dry erase board on campus with a question on it, then using that question to get into a conversation. And I just love how this kind of affirms that methodology that, like, asking good questions and prying into people's worldviews is really part and parcel to doing not just apologetics ministry, but really gospel ministry in general, where, I would say 75 years ago, most people in America, if you asked them if they were Christian, like Doug just said, like we would pretty much know what that means. But today you have to see, even if somebody says, "Oh yeah, I'm saved," it's like, okay, well, what does that mean for you? Because it's very, very important that we pry into the idea. And I call it, to summarize, I call it this. As apologists, we often answer the questions that the person we're talking to are not asking. We need to figure out what question they're asking.
Yes.
If that makes sense.
Yes.
So, yeah. Great. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you, Bill. And Bill, before you mute, where are you joining us from?
I'm in Houston, Texas, and I'm on the road right now with some students on a Ratio Christi fellowship trip down to Galveston to hang out at the beach today and be friends.
Ratio Christi is just an amazing, amazing ministry. And I really love what you mentioned about posting a question, which really allows that to be a platform for spiritual conversation. And positive spiritual conversation is just priceless, absolutely priceless. Great, really great. Thank you. Thank you. Gary,
So if a person doesn't have a established worldview, say they're not of a different religion, or maybe they just said, no, I don't really think about things that deeply. I just try to get along. I just try to do my thing. How do you respond to that kind of person?
Yeah, so it's really good. Two answers. So the first one is going to be that evangelism isn't there's no one size fits all, meaning that there are tactics because the atheist or the true apathetic is its own category. And there are strategies that are really great for engaging that demographic that are less effective with the theist because it's such a different lens in which they're viewing creation. And so this does tend to be for theistics that have ideas. Now, where this does still work for the agnostic is when they have a clear philosophy. So someone may follow a philosopher's worldview, and then in that regard, it travels pretty consistently.
Great, thanks.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Carrie, how about you?
Yes, I'm retired now, but several years ago when I was working, I had a gay coworker, and we liked the same baseball and football teams, and started a conversation, found out he was Buddhist, and he saw Jesus as a great teacher. So when we would get together for lunch, we had an agreement. If I could talk about Christianity, he could talk about Buddhism. And so it was a great conversation. I knew him for about 2 years before he left for another job. And it was just great to know that it was very easy to talk to him and have spiritual conversations.
Yes, yes. And Carrie, what you just shared right there is there's an often overlooked real power to what you just described. Because I'm going to guess, let me guess, when he left, he didn't leave saying, I'm a Christian. Is that correct?
That's correct. But sadly, he told me I was the only Christian had never told him he was going to hell.
So hear this with what Carrie just did is earlier I mentioned that those 5 stages that virtually, I mean, there can be outliers, certainly, virtually everyone goes through, which is trusting a Christ follower, becoming curious, opening up to change, pursuing answers for yourself, and then crossing the line of faith. And rarely do people jump any of those steps, just with the way that brain science tends to work and decisions are made. And so with Carrie actively moved this man through steps 1 and 2, which is trusting a Christian, looks like perhaps one of the first ones, and then becoming curious, which was engaging in Christian dialogue. Now, instead of being here in the I need to trust a Christian, because often we want to go cross the finish line, but I want to get you there. Here's the gospel message. If this person does not trust a Christ follower, it's exceedingly difficult to see movement on step 5, which is accepting Christ. And so the work that Carrie did has actually gotten him past the crucial step of 1 into the very least step 2. And so when I or you or the next evangelist meets this person, they are not at the same place they were before he engaged with Carrie. And so all of these things are huge victories. Now, Carrie may never get the credit, and this person might not even go back and reflect on Carrie when later this guy walks across the line of faith. Whoever's the last person that does that, assuming, God willing, that happens. But without Carrie, it's really unlikely that they ever get to that place there at the end. And so good, really, really good, Carrie. Awesome, awesome. Let's see. Ben, there might be things in the chat that I'm not seeing, and I also see that your hand is raised.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and ask the one question in the chat that really leaps out, and I do have my own questions slash comment. So Pascal, our good friend from Zimbabwe, asked this: how do you keep yourself in control of the conversation if you see that the person is challenging you more than you expected? So you're getting a lot more pushback and finding yourself having to dig in. How do you keep control of the conversation?
Yes, I'm formulating the answer to keep this simple. And also, all of you might notice, so I'm from the East Coast. I was raised there. And I know I was told there's some people here who English is not their first language. So I'm really trying hard to be like a proper standard California way of speech. And gosh, it's difficult. So forgive me if all of a sudden I slip into mobster, like Jersey Shore language before I come back to proper American. And so okay, so there's that hostile person who's just challenging me more than I intended. So 2 things here. One is I want to determine whether or not this person is part of the harvest. So there's questions. They might be phrased a little aggressively or a little forcefully. They are genuine. Like this person isn't offended and is happy to continue this conversation. I'm just somewhat surprised by the strength of the questions. If it is a devourer, I'm going to wrap up that conversation and realize, okay, this is, I'm sitting here trying to share my pearls. Like, no, thank you. There's Ashley Hemphill over there who doesn't know Jesus, and I'm going to share my pearls with Ashley. Hey, Ashley, here are some pearls, right? So there's one. Now, when it says staying in control, here's what I do tend to do when those are coming. Is step 1 is empathy. Empathy always puts us and the non-believer over here in this category, and the questions over here is something separate that we're both examining. There could really quickly be a shoot the messenger mentality that happens, and so we want to avoid that by empathizing, by saying, okay, Ben, I'm going to put you on the hot spot right now. Can you just throw out there one objection someone might have about Christianity? Any at all? Anything?
The God of the Old Testament seems like a moral monster.
Yeah, okay. So empathy. first. I want to just jump straight into defense, right? Empathy. You know what, Ben? I can see that. And that makes a lot of sense. I don't think there's a way to read about women and children or whole groups of certain ethnic identities being wiped out and not feel something in response to that. In fact, God would tell us that we're actually supposed to. It's really, really good. Okay, so one, empathy. Okay, it's very hard to attack somebody who is respecting your worldview. Two, if I can engage with that question, I'm going to right now. Okay, and say, hey, there are some details that I'd love to share, and then see how that might alter our perspective on this in one way or another. Okay, I'm going to share some details. Or I might not know what to say about what Ben just said. Okay, so let's say, how do I stay in control? So Ben just gave me that question. I said, Ben, that was really good. You know what? I've thought about that before. I've never really researched an incredibly strong answer. But I'm going to do that and I'm going to come back. And thank you. I really appreciate this. And I would love to learn more about this subject along with you. Thank you for that. Okay, now Ben and I together are learning about this subject. So we just became partners. Okay, so that's step number 2. Step number 3, I want to think about what this is for you, is keeping it in control. Now I'm going to go back to Ben. I'm going to say, Ben, I'm contemplating which one I tell you first. So you all just heard Ben mention that about massacres in the Old Testament. We in this room probably have various abilities with how comfortable we'd be engaging in that question. Some of you may not have an answer to that question, but you still believe. You still believe in Jesus. Ask yourself, you in this room, we're talking to you as the believers. What is it? What is you hear that. What is your main reason for still believing despite the question that Ben just brought up? Okay, so now keep that in mind. I'm going to go back. So now, Ben, you asked me that question. I empathized. I mentioned, if I don't know, like, hey, let's explore this together. Thank you. I'm really looking forward to learning more about this. This is really good. And then number 3, I'm about to turn the subject back to my area of strength. Ben, I'd say the main reason that I am making peace with this in the moment, say curious more than devastated, is that, gosh, if a man can predict his death and resurrection and pull it off, that means a lot and carries a lot of weight with him. And so I have come to understand that Jesus predicted his death and resurrection and actually pulled that off. And so if that's the case, I'm feeling like the best path for me is to still take him seriously and believe what it is that he has to say about reality and especially life after death. Now, I have just shifted the topic. In there, I acknowledged this question. I talked about how we're going to address it in the future. And I shared with him how it is that I'm still processing this as a believer, despite having been exposed to that reason for doubt. Now, if Ben chooses to continue in this conversation, we've just moved it to my area of specialty. There is no apologetic evangelistic topic that I personally know better than the resurrection, right? That's my strong area, and that's what brought me to believing in Jesus, the historicity of that. So I am now, again, very comfortable. I forget the name of the person who asked the question. Ben, could you remind me, what was his name? Chat.
Originally, Pascal.
Oh, sorry, Pascal. Yes.
Pascal, yes. Pascal. That would be how I stay in control. And now we're talking about the topic that I feel the most confident.
Yeah, that's great. So actually, we just embarked on one of the points that I actually wanted to make, and that is this. So first of all, thanks, Joey. This was great. And the comment I want to make is that, and it ties in a little bit to what Joel was saying, is that as apologists, we are always eager to seek the answer to the next question that may come our way. And our idea is that we want to be fully equipped with every possible answer that could ever come our way. And sometimes that good motivation actually holds us back because we feel like until I'm ready, I'm not ready to be a worker, right? I need to keep training, keep training, keep training, and I always can lean on that lack of like every possible answer as an excuse not to step out. So so that it can be something that we want to avoid. And instead, I think that in addition to the important work of learning the answers and solidifying how we address and give good answers for the hope that we have within, I think we need to do a lot more of this. What we've just learned from you, Joey, and what we've embarked on. We need to figure out ways to practice this. Now, as I go through your steps, it seems fairly simple, right? I should be able to remember these steps. But when I'm actually thrust into a situation, it's really difficult, especially for some of us who have a tendency to want to like give the answer, right? That's why we've learned them. We want to just, hey, I want to tell you what's true. We need a lot of practice so that this methodology that you've described comes more naturally. So I think, and Doug and I have actually been thinking, in our overall training that we do, Apologetics on Mission, we need to incorporate more opportunity to practice these tactics that you've clearly given us so that we are better prepared. So as much as much importance as learning answers, we need to learn these tactics. And so I'm really grateful for hearing this from your perspective. I think you did a great job in teeing us up, and you set a great example of encouraging us to start practicing even here in this setting. So that's kind of what I wanted to share. I see Ray has his hand up, so go ahead, Ray.
Yeah. On that point, I'm affiliated with the Reason to Believe Fellows. I'm sorry, C.S. Lewis Institute Fellows Program. And the fellows just started an effort where they have face-to-face meetings, which are role-playing meetings. Each person is assigned a role. You're a Buddhist today, and the other guy is Christian, and talk. And so they pair up in these meetings, and then they talk about dealing with folks that way, and just practice it. So role playing is a one way of doing it.
Yes, yes. And I'll tell you all with that, there's a sense of unnatural, when we role play at RTB, I always actually do include role plays in all of my trainings. There is an importance at getting comfortable doing it in a controlled environment before going out and doing it in the wild. And one of the things that I would suggest for all of you is ask one of your Christian friends to do this with them. So I go and I say, hey, Belinda, hey Belinda, I just attended this evangelism training and I learned these concepts. But I'm really like, before I go and I try it, just out there with someone that doesn't know Jesus, you sit down and just do some mock combo with me. Just a quick role play with me. Oh, okay, yeah, sure. Well, what's happening now is I'm actually going to be training Belinda on what it is that I just learned. And I'm going to be inspiring Belinda to do the same with others. And we could actually start a cultural pattern of where this is just what we do. Like we talk to someone, we train, and we start modeling what it looks like to equip ourselves to engage non-believers. And so, yes, here, it's always great to do that together. And then also out in the wild, practice it.
Awesome.
Hey, Joey, I wanted to share real quick. I put in the chat, but you referred several times to the 5 steps that a non-believer goes through before they become a believer. And it's not going to show up here.
No.
See a little bit. Anyway, this comes from a book called I Once Was Lost, What Postmodern Skeptics Taught Us About Their Faith to Jesus. Very small book, but I recently read it. And so when you describe those steps, I'm right in the middle of that book. Well, I just finished the book, actually. So along with that, you mentioned Greg Koukl several times, and his book on tactics is evident in your talk as well. So let's see. Do we have a final question? We're almost up to.
Yeah, Doug, there is Ashley has a question. Ashley, do you want to just say your question?
Yeah. Well, I couldn't remember what he had said steps 3 and 4 were about.
About the journey to the cross. So one, I have them in the handout that was posted in the chat.
Oh, great. Okay.
And those were identified by Doug Schott, who's the director of evangelism for InterVarsity Christian Fellowship. It's just incredible material there. So yes. And maybe Raheel, could we grab Raheel and he'll be our last one?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. Good evening and greets in Christ to all. Thank you, first of all, sir. Your whole content is so good and visibly. I so much learned from it. My question is for my unsaved friend. I saw at my job place that my colleague um, give doing evangelism like Islamic evangelism. So he preached Islam to my another colleague, and I asked him a question that do you believe on the heaven or hell, or do you sure about what you will go after die? If you die, then where you? So he replied me that he is confused. So how can I lead him to on that thing? Because before sharing the gospel with him, I thought because he do not know about me and about, but he have a good idea about Christianity. So
Yeah.
how can I lead him? Thank you.
For the sake of time, I'll be really quick with this. And remember, my email address is in the chat. And so we could discuss later. And I would also be happy to even one-on-one Zoom with you for deeper contact or deeper strategy down the road. To start with, I would say, to me, it's the resurrection, because that's someone who is very concerned or uncertain about what happens when we die. And where do I go when we die? And how can I know where I'll go when I die? Only one person has ever done that, died, went there, stayed there long enough to know that this was not a 15-minute flat line on the operating table, like just 3 days later, and came back to tell us. And the verifiable historicity of that is without compare. It's just second to none. And so I would be happy to help discuss with you more on how to go about having that conversation. But that right, if that is, how can I know where I go when I die? I mean, only one person has ever gone there and come back to tell us. And that is verifiable. That is a real linchpin for someone who has that type of concern. That sound good?
Thank you, sir. I will.
Sounds good to me, Joey. Well, Joey, I'll tell you what, I think we'd love to have you come back again.
Love
Are
to
you,
come.
are you available tomorrow? Anyway, thank you so much. And thank you all for joining us. As Ben said, this is the biggest crowd we have had. They came not knowing you, many of them not knowing you. They came because of the topic. That's what attracted them. Now that they know you, they're going to come regardless of what the topic is. They want to hear you. So thank you again. And Ashley, if you would you close us in prayer?
Of course. Let's pray. Lord, we just thank you for allowing us all to gather here together today, virtually in this online classroom. We thank you for Joey, for his heart for evangelism and his willingness to share about that with us today. I pray for each of us, Lord, just in these coming days and weeks, that you would give us opportunities to put some of this into practice and help us to be kind and loving in our evangelism, to be smart in the ways that we interact with people. And Lord, that you would just help us to improve in this ability in being able to share the hope that we have in Jesus and to be able to offer that to the lost people around us. And so I pray your blessings as we go out today in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. All right. All you ITS students, we'll see you next week, this time for lesson number 3 on worldviews. You all have a great week.
All right. Thanks again, Joey. Awesome.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
We'll see you next week.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.